This is New York firefighter Raphael Porriette for Firehouse Subs. Every day, a part of every sub you buy at Firehouse Subs helps provide life-saving equipment for first responders. And now, for a limited time, they're introducing the Daily Sub Special. Every day, get a medium sub of the day for just $5.55. They kick it off with Meatball Monday and finish it off with Italian Sunday, with something delicious every day in between for just $5.55. Firehouse Subs. Enjoy more subs, save more lives. Tap the banner now to learn more.
Welcome to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast, your source for solutions-focused dialogue about race in America, with your host, Scott Speed.
Hello and welcome to Race Haven Live. My name is Dr. Scott Speed and I appreciate you being here. This is Race Haven Live and it is a show designed to be a dialogue where Race Haven listeners and I can learn and communicate our way towards collective solutions to the social challenges facing America. The agenda, because as you know, everyone has an agenda, right? Well, my agenda is simple. I simply want to work towards the ideal of being one nation, indivisible. That is the foundation for everything that I attempt to do here. So if you agree with this ideal, then we have common ground, and I want to hear from you. To join the dialogue, simply dial 929-477-4107 and press 1 if you'd like to speak and share your perspective. This is an opportunity for you to call in. So I hope that our Race Haven listeners, our dedicated Race Haven listeners who've been with us for over a year now, will take advantage of these live opportunities to call in and share some of their perspectives, because you guys are awesome in listening to me ramble on and some of my guests and John and I over the last year. So I want to do these live shows to give you an opportunity to get in on the dialogue. So the lineup for today's show is going to be 3 segments. Segment 1, we're going to discuss the Shea Moisture controversy. Segment 2, we're going to discuss ESPN's First Takes. ESPN has a show called First Take, and they did a segment titled Young Black Players Getting into Trouble. So I have some thoughts on that. I posted something on Facebook about that, and I have some thoughts about that I want to just share and hopefully get some of your perspectives on that as well. And then segment 3, I'm going to unpack my thoughts on what I perceive to be the unnecessary chastising of African-American people in the media and by other African-American people. So I have a lot of thoughts on that. This may just be scratching the surface of that topic because it's something I've wanted to discuss for a long time now. And it's actually 2 different shows. I could do 2 different shows on that segment alone, one on the media and one on what I hear when I'm around other African-American people in terms of chastising, just African-American people in general that I take issue with. And I want to speak on it. I want to have that conversation out loud. So with that being said, for the first segment, I want to jump into the Shea Moisture discussion. And again, if you're listening online and you want to jump into the dialogue and share your perspective on any of these segments, simply dial 929-477-4107. And once you're in, press the number 1, and I'll know that you want to speak. And if you're listening online and you're going to go mobile, you can just dial that number just to listen. If you got to, leave and hop in the car or something, you can dial that number and listen to the show while you're on the move. So with that being said, the first segment and what I want to discuss is the Shea Moisture controversy. And it was brought to my attention, as most things are these days, for me, at least, is through Facebook. And, someone posted in the Facebook, the Race Haven Community Dialogue Facebook group, posted an article about this topic. And the gentleman, it was an African-American gentleman by the name of, I won't share his name. He didn't give me permission, so I won't do that. But he stated this. He said, "I find this to be disturbing and detrimental to other causes. I don't understand the need to try to limit a company to a specific customer base. So basically, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know about this issue, is that Shea Moisture is a beauty product, a hair and body product company that is owned and operated by African people. And their mother started the business way back in Sierra Leone in Africa, way back into the early 1900s. I believe maybe their grandmother at this point, early 1900s. And it's still a family-run and family-owned business. And it's a very, very popular product called Shea Moisture. They have a wonderful products. My wife has several of them in our household. And through this controversy, I've learned that many people, African-American people especially, have their products. And when I initially saw it come across my timeline through this gentleman who posted it in the Facebook group, as well as other people on my regular timeline, my initial thought, honestly speaking, was, some people just, need something to be upset about or something to complain about, because initially my initial thoughts were, well, I don't see an issue with a company expanding to market to Americans of European descent. And the controversy was because of a commercial that Shea Moisture put out. And the commercial pretty much centered around what they called hair hate. And it had several European American women discussing their hair hate, and, with Shea Moisture being the product, promoting this. And it was the first time that I believe that Shea Moisture has ever marketed to European American, women. And a lot of African American women took issue with that. And one specifically, who was a member of the Race Haven Community Dialogue group, she shared some of her thoughts. And in the Race Haven group, and a lot of dialogue came after that through that thread. And through listening or reading her and listening to her and empathizing with her, her position, it broadened my perspective. It opened my mind to, why, she and maybe, some of the other African-American women who may share the reason. I'm sure everyone has different reasons. And I'm sure everyone doesn't, think the way she does, but it at least allowed us a window into why one African-American woman took offense to it. So I'm going to read what she had to say here as well. And in a second, but I also want to state that just through reading through Facebook, there were several, African-American women who used their products that took issue with it and really felt betrayed, that this company that was, built with African-American people and African people, I'm sure in other places as well, not just America, but African people in general, people of African descent, using their products and help build this company to a very successful company, multi-million-dollar company. And now all of a sudden, the way that some of the women felt was, now you're going to turn your backs on us. And I personally didn't understand that, because in my mind, I said, that's just good business. Just branching out, you've marketed, you found your niche, and you have a product and a core and a base. And now you're in a position where you're ready to branch out. And for what I understand, an investor invested in the company, and I'm sure that meant, they had to make more money, because now these investors are going to want their return on their investment. And so now they have to expand their market. So for me, thinking about it from an economic standpoint, I said, okay, that's just sound business. And what's wrong with marketing your products to different groups if it, solves their issues as well? So that was kind of the way I thought about it. And I didn't put too much thought into it outside of that until I read what this young lady said, in the Race Haven Facebook group. And I'm going to read her comment now. So she stated this: "This company would not exist if it weren't for Black women. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. America has a despicable history of erasing Black women in this country. This is more of that exact same thing. Black women find something, love it, promote it, support it with our dollars. Company or person gets rich because of us, then we get erased from the equation altogether. It isn't about reaching out to white women. It's about erasing Black women. We are your customer base. Do not take us for granted. Understand and remember that we have been villainized, slandered, abused, and basically persecuted for not conforming to white hair, quote, straight standards. It is an extremely sensitive subject for us because there has been so much pain involved in trying to conform and assimilate or in trying to reject these oppressive standards that are tied into our ability to keep a job and provide for our families. So to have this company that we have literally nursed from infancy turn around and drop us for a white woman, LOL, laugh out loud. It is a huge slap in the face. The company issued an apology, but the sisters don't want to hear it. They should have known better. This pattern of behavior is too consistent. The ongoing erasure is too painful. The history is too deep and long. So that was this young lady's perspective. And like most things, and what we attempt to do on this, on this platform through Race Haven, is unpack things and unpack the complexity. And because of my work in this space, and because of me becoming more open-minded and being conscious and aware of listening and empathizing and respecting everyone's perspectives, I never hold on too tightly to my own. I'm always willing to adjust my perspective as I gain greater understanding on a particular topic. So again, I shared my initial thoughts, but after reading these comments, it made sense to me as to why, someone like the young lady who shared this would take issue. And even with reading this, I'll be honest. So the first time I read this, I still wasn't completely, I still didn't completely understand some of the wording. Now, I empathize with some of the things that she said around the straight hair standards and the white straight hair standards and how that impacts African-American women. I know that issue well, based on, just being around African-American women my entire life. So I understand some of those pressures. But what I didn't understand is, why, when she said, that they were dropped for a white woman. And what I didn't understand was, in my mind, I said, well, how are you dropped? And I actually asked her to gain more clarity. I said to her, I said, you know what? It sounds like there's something deeper here. It sounds like, do you have any precedents for feeling dropped? Because as the conversation evolved, it was like they're eventually, her statements were, they're going to eventually reformulate their product, and they're going to forget about their base and the people who helped build them up from the beginning. And now their products will be marketed exclusively and created exclusively and, formulated exclusively for European American women, or let's just say women of European descent in general. And so what I asked her after she made that statement in the thread, I said, why? Instead of me jumping to conclusions and saying, well, you're making an assumption, which, again, my knee-jerk reaction and my instinct would want to do that. But, again, just being more aware and wanting to ask questions to learn, to get to the deeper underlying reason and root causes why people feel the way they do, I just asked questions. And the question I asked was, well, why would you say that? Why did you jump to that? Do you have precedent? Is there something that's missing? And then she went on to explain another product that was created by an African-American company. And that's what they did. Over time, they eventually reformulated their product to only cater towards women of European descent. And that was at the root of some of the things she said. Had I not dug a little bit deeper, I would have just been making assumptions based on some of the things that she was, writing. And as we know, conveying complexity is difficult in general, but also conveying complexity through text on Facebook is even more difficult. And that's where it really takes the patience to want to ask questions before, jumping in or trying to add your perspective. So I see that we have a caller on the line that wants to jump in. I'm going to let this caller jump in, and then I'm going to actually share with you what I received from another member of the Race Haven group, a woman of European descent who was really confused, and she didn't understand the backlash from women of African descent. So I'm going to share her comments with you next. But before I do that, we have a caller on the line calling in with the last four digits of your phone number being 8873. Caller, if you could please state your name, where you're calling in from, and ask your question or share your perspective.
Hi, this is Gypsy J. I'm the one who made the comment on Facebook.
Hey, J, how you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy that you were able to carve out some time to call in.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So please, if you can just provide some context. You heard how I laid everything out please, just provide some context initially, and then I'm actually going to read you something that a woman of European descent inboxed me. She inboxed it to me, and I want to share that with you and get your response from that as well. But do you have any initial thoughts outside of what you already wrote?
Well, I just want to make one correction. The company that I felt dropped us was that it's not that they don't exclusively make their product for women of European descent. It's just that, so this is a really nuanced kind of topic because there are several, stairs, I guess maybe even levels or stairs involved because it's not just about it being about European descent. There's also, the discussion of the colorism and then the texturism that goes along with that, with the ideology being as close to white, is like the safest way for black folks to exist in this country, right? So in doing that, what happened is that the more mulatto, if you will, looking African Americans is what you see more. That's what you see more. And this company that I'm talking about, at first they were with the Natural Sisters who started the natural movement or got it restarted because, you remember our parents and the afros and whatnot, they started it. I guess they revived it. But the women who did that were dark-skinned, very coarse-haired, women who were just tired because it would take them the most effort to change their hair into this and to conform with what I say.
You're breaking up a little bit. And
this company that sold that I felt that
Gypsy, can you hear me? Gypsy.
Yeah,
Hold on,
I can
Gypsy.
hear you.
Okay, you were breaking up a little bit.
I was. Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you nice and clear now. Could you just repeat the last two sentences?
Great. I said that the women who revived the natural hair movement were dark-skinned women with, or not even necessarily just dark skin, but just skin or lighter skin. It didn't matter really that particular thing, but it's the texture, the coarsest hair, the one that has the most sponge effect to it, that would have the most shrinkage, but most of the ones who really reach that movement, and then you see them consistently fade out, so that the natural hair movement becomes about this, acceptable, like the was out of the Shea Moisture commercial with the other white women. That is the majority of black women don't look like that. The majority of black women in America have coarser hair. I'm kind of going out on a limb when I say that, but I'm pretty sure if there's any statistical evidence, anybody can look that up. I'm pretty sure that would be the case because relaxers are still being sold, by the gazillions because women have coarse hair and women have coarse hair and they're trying to, conform to the standard, to the straight hair standard. And that company that I said sold out, they still market to African American women. You'll see in all of their ads, in all of their commercials, is lighter skinned, much looser curl pattern women. Do you understand what I mean?
I do. So, okay, go ahead. I do.
I think that maybe doesn't understand, but because of the oppression, the internalized oppression, we live in, that we experience, because of that, an issue with tourism, and then texturism on top of that, you know, the next step. So
let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
So you said because of that struggle, you said you internalize a level of oppression because of having to conform, to those standards. I think that would be something I can imagine that for someone who's not of African descent, they may struggle trying to understand that. What type, like, how does that, is it stress? What is it? Could you just, unpack that a little bit more, maybe to help some of our listeners understand, who may say, well, how can you be oppressed by something like that?
Understand how you think that people want to understand how the oppression, what it looks like, or like, what do you mean when do you want me to unpack?
Well, just how does it make you feel? Just unpacking just how it makes you feel, as someone.
Okay. So I mean, in a word, it makes me feel really bad. It's upsetting. It's angering. It's frustrating. It's just frustrating because to see and you know what? I don't think that it's only black women that really suffer from this, but I think that black men suffer from it a little less because they just cut their hair off. You know what I mean? And who have the more.
And I'm sorry, just you're still going in a little bit, so I'm not sure if you have like a sweet spot you can get to. I'm trying to.
Maybe I do. Maybe this is it right here. Is this it right here?
I can hear you clear. Hopefully this will be it because I'm letting it go on. I apologize to the listeners. I know it's not a smooth listen, but I really want to get Gypsy's perspective on this and this context. So thank you for bearing with us. As we work through these. The choppiness of the call. So, but please continue. Are you there, Gypsy? Okay, so Gypsy's dropped completely. Maybe she'll call us right back in when she gets a better signal. But one of the things that she just said was, maybe even men, African American men, experience this sense of having to conform as well. And I can, in terms of our hair, and I can also speak to it a little bit as a young man. Okay, Gypsy again. Let me see if we have a better connection. Hello,
yeah,
Gypsy.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me well at all now?
Yes, you sound a lot clearer now. So hopefully it'll stay that way.
Okay, great. Yes, hopefully it will.
The last thing you were saying, and I was about to comment on really quickly, you said as men, African American men, experience it as well. And it's easier for them because they can just cut their hair. And I just wanted to share that I remember when I first graduated from undergrad, when I was in undergrad, I had cornrows. I had cornrows when I was in undergrad. And that was like as a young man, one of the things that I kind of thought to myself is that I was never going to conform with my hair. I said, you know what? I'm going to be successful in business and in life, and I'm still going to have these cornrows. Now, that didn't last very long just because, not necessarily to conform, but because I just got tired of having to have my hair done, and maintained and upkeep. It just was easier to cut it. But I remember at one point, questioning why, I couldn't just, express myself with my hair the way I wanted to. And then I'm going to leave you with this, too. And then some people of European descent, when I had this conversation with them, some of them said, well, it's not just an African-American thing because, I want to wear my hair long, but if I'm going to be in the corporate world or business world, I got to get cleaned up too. I can't have a long, hair, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to get your perspective on that.
Okay. My perspective is it's not the same at all. It'd be one thing. The reason why it's not the same is because what's happening is that in order for us to look, in quotes, professional, we can't let our hair exist as it grows out of our head. It is deemed unprofessional. I would never go on a job interview with my hair the way that it is right now. if I really wanted to get that job, I would not go on an interview with my hair like it is right now. And the way it is right now is exactly the way that it was after I got out of the shower this morning after I just washed my hair. So it is just in its natural state, the way that it grows out of my head. But I would not go on the job interview with my hair like that because I know that it is looked at as unprofessional for me to have, big floofy hair, and that's the problem. And my hair, and it's easier for me to conform to that standard because my hair is actually like, I do have the bigger curl wave pattern or whatever. But so it's easier for me to conform to that standard. But for a lot of my sisters out there, it's not. It's not as easy. It's not as easy to conform to that standard. It means that in order for them to do it, they have to put chemicals in their hair. And you know that there was like someone has found the link between the high incidence of I want to say it's when you have, I guess, like there's several cysts on the uterus, polycystic ovarian syndrome. There's like a huge occurrence of that, and they're finding that that it has some relationship to relaxers. I mean, it's just things like that. Like and children are being subjected to these chemicals because the parents want their child to be accepted socially, and that's why it's different. It's different because girls at school are being kicked out of school or being told to go back home because their hair is in cornrows, because that is a protective style. It is also an easy way to maintain your hair when you are African American and your hair is coarser and you can't just wet your hair every day and leave out the house. If you can't do that, then you need to do something so that you can get to school on time, you can get to work on time, and those styles provide us with that convenience, as well as it being healthy and protective for our hair, because we're not really supposed to be combing through all those curls and whatnot every single day, constantly, applying heat to the hair and all of that stuff. Like that's not healthy for anyone's hair. But especially when your hair is of a lower porosity and it is, more tightly coiled. Like you shouldn't do that all the time. And that's why I say it's not different. That's why I say it's not the same. It's not the same.
No, that makes sense. And I think it's, especially, from the woman's standpoint, guys sometimes can oversimplify things because even, no matter your descent, guys may say, you know what, we just keep our hair cut to a certain level, keep it groomed and tight, so that's how guys may look at it. But I think the nuance that you express in terms of for a woman of European descent, when she lets her hair grow out naturally, she just pretty much has to comb it down or whatever, or brush it down, and she's good to go. An African-American woman who lets her hair grow out naturally, it's not that simple, and it doesn't look the same way. It may not lay down the same way, but if you just, for an African-American woman. If I
can just interject really quickly, just this one idea that would be that simple for us if our hair was accepted the way it grows out of our head. It would be that easy. But the fact of the matter is that and that is part of the oppression that we feel.
Right.
Do you understand?
I get that.
That even normal to us, even like, and I don't even know if everyone is even thinking of it on this level, because it is just like my mother said to me today. It's in the sinew of our anatomy. It's part of us. It just even seems weird to even think that the hair growing out of your head doesn't necessarily need to be, altered in any kind of way. You shouldn't have to do anything other than maybe fluff it out or pick it out or whatever, and then walk out the door and everyone be like, oh, you look nice today. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I know exactly what you mean. That's what I was trying to bring out. I was just trying to bring that out, and I'm glad you went on ahead and expressed that, because I don't think, I know for a fact that there are people in America, even Well, I won't even go there. I'll just say this. I know for a fact there's people in America that don't even realize that when they see an African-American woman with straight hair that's laying down, that's not natural. They probably think that that's literally just, what it is.
Right.
And they don't realize that
Right.
African-American, women of African descent in general, their hair is more naturally will look like an afro or some type of puff or something.
Right.
So
Right.
So I appreciate that. But before we close out this segment, I want to let you hear what a woman, who is a member of the group and a friend of mine, someone who I know, and she inboxed me instead of posting in the group for whatever reason. Some people just don't want to put things in the group. I get inboxes
right.
often.
I wanted to be careful. I mean, I understand she's feeling a little maybe scared or nervous.
Right. And actually, she said that, unfortunately, because sometimes people in a group can be quite mean, and that's actually something she pointed out. But with that being said, she stated this. She said, all this time I have talked to others. Well, let me say this. I'm paraphrasing. I took bits and pieces of some of the things she wrote because she wrote a lot. But this is a part that I wanted to bring out. She said, all this time I have talked to others about racism and have suggested for people to be more empathetic to the feelings of African Americans as we try to navigate forward and not forgetting or erasing what has happened, but learning from it and how it's impacted African Americans. From that being more sensitive to the struggles of systemic racism and how to combat that moving forward. My whole thought around a solution to this has been solidarity. However, when I see the uproar of certain things such as Shea wanting to be inclusive of everyone, I get confused. How do we move forward? How do we move this country forward in solidarity if we say we want it, but the party that needs it the most backs out when the inclusiveness is directed towards Caucasians? It comes across as we want solidarity, justice, and inclusiveness until you step on our turf and like parts of our culture. What do you have to say to that?
I mean, I so understand where she's coming from. I so understand, and I only imagine that if I were in her shoes, I would feel the exact same way, because she literally has not lived all these years being Black and watching the patterns as they have gone. And I just want to say that I hope that she does still stand in solidarity, and that she still, continues to, be an alliance. And I hope that this whole thing hasn't turned her or anyone else away. It's not about, I don't think that the majority of us are, it's not that we were mad at Shea for including white folks. It's that we are upset that they didn't, in that commercial, that they didn't include more Black women, and specifically Black women who have struggled the most, and the Black women that put that company on the map, which were the Black women with the coarser hair, and also Black women of darker complexions. You know what I mean? And that was part of the uprise, as well as, for me, it was this comparing hair hate with a white woman. There's just some things that we're just not going to do.
Right. Okay.
You're deciding, what color you want your hair to be that day is just not anything compared to literally trauma passed on from generation to generation over this hair. Little Black children all over the country sitting in between their mama's knees, crying their eyes out. It looks like torture and abuse, because they are trying to comb that child's hair into a socially acceptable style, and that socially acceptable style needs to be smooth. The edges need to be laid, and it needs to be as straight as possible. And if it's not going to be as straight as possible, then the edges better be, laid, and everything better be smooth. You know what I mean? So
right.
There is just so much behind the internalized hatred of so that right there was just a bad thing to have in the commercial. And the CEO admitted that, and to his credit, he admitted it, and he said a lot of things straight. I hope that folks listen to him, because I definitely don't want to put Shea Moisture out of business. I want them to continue to thrive and grow, but it's just being, sensitive and understanding of the to the customer base. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
you just can't treat everyone the same. You know what I mean? Like if you're a doctor of psychology, true or false? Am I making that up?
Education, doctor of education.
Of education. Well, but still, even in education, you would know that you could not teach a child that has been abused and hurt and abandoned or forlorn or whatever. You couldn't teach that child the same as you could one that had generations and generations of their family being right there and so forth. You just have to be careful about your customer base.
Sure. I get it 100%, and I think that's a great place to wrap that up. I think what you said, the way you just finished everything was so perfect. And I hope that
I actually didn't even touch what she asked, but I just hope that people stay with us, keep being in alliance with us, and I think that the more that she and other people of European descent talk to us and understand, how deep this is, and they will understand it. It's not that we were pulling away from them. We were just needing to be included, needing to be seen, and we need for all of our people to be seen, not just our ones that are as close to European looking as possible and still be called Black. You understand?
Absolutely.
All of us, because there's more of us that are deeper complected, around. There's a lot more of us than you would ever know from looking at television or print media ads and so forth. We just need to broaden the definition of beauty for it to include African women and women of African descent. It just needs to be broader, and that's what the vitriol was about.
Awesome.
I'm done.
Thank. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate you for calling in and adding that context. The show would not have been as valid if you didn't call in and add that context, because I could not speak to it in a way that you just spoke to us. So thank you so much for taking the time, Gypsy, and I appreciate your contribution to the Race Haven community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great day. So I want to just, Gypsy just brought out so many things. I appreciate her articulating all the things she just articulated. So before we go to the next segment, I just want to close out by saying a couple of things that resonated with me. It just kind of speaks to what this whole Race Haven movement is all about, which is dialogue, and more importantly, listening. Our sensibilities are always going to be shocked when something like this happens, but it's also a great opportunity for us to learn. An opportunity to learn from one another. She stated some things that, I'm sure that many, not all, but many, women of European, or just people of European descent in general, don't understand the trauma of having to grow up, like she expressed, with their hair, being combed out, with that fine-tooth comb going through the kinks, and these little girls crying. I've seen sisters, cousins, aunts or whatever, have to get their hair done, and it looks painful when they cry, and it's such a task, and it's such a chore, all because if they allowed their hair just to do what it does naturally, they wouldn't be able to fit and conform into society, and it breeds about a level of resentment. And there's so many layers of resentment that African American people carry that a lot of European Americans just wouldn't have any knowledge of, because they haven't lived it. So one of the things I try to do with this Race Haven platform is to have these conversations out loud, so that people who are truly trying to understand and who truly want to empathize across, going both ways, can hear from one another, learn from one another, so that we can grow in understanding, so that we can, the more we can empathize with one another, the better we understand one another, and we can get away from sensationalism that, goes on in the media and in politics and all these various lanes that divide us. when the reality is I said from day one when I started Race Haven in my first episode is I think we have a communication issue. I truly believe that we have a communication issue in terms of most people, in terms of the masses, not speaking about, how power is wielded in this society and how capitalism and classism and those things are wielded to separate and divide. But when it comes to race relations in general amongst the masses, I truly believe that we just have a communication divide. And I hope that, the context that was brought out from what Gypsy had to say is meaningful to the listeners. And another thing that I think was important, as she said, which I love, is that the CEO, when he explained, first of all, he apologized and he understood where he had fallen short in conveying and being cognizant of the sensitivity and how he can't just lump the experiences of what's quote unquote hair hate is and think that it's the same amongst people of different ethnicities, because it's not. So that was a lesson for him to learn. But here's the thing. One of the things that you'll hear me saying, you've heard me say in the past, is that one of the ways that we learn is we got to say stupid stuff in order to learn what the right stuff is. So, and I use that analogy often because that's kind of how I communicate with my wife. I said, babe, we got to just talk. And sometimes I got to say dumb stuff so that you can correct me so I can get to the right stuff, because the dumb stuff is in my head and I won't get to the right stuff if I'm afraid to share it, if I'm afraid to act or whatever. And if you're not empathetic, if you're not nurturing, if you're not caring, you're not, helping me and guiding me lovingly, then that'll breed resentment on my end because I can't say things because we don't have that level of communication. So just on a broader scale, the CEO of Shea Moisture, I hope that he gets support. I hope that the buyers of the product will continue to buy and support the product and accept his apology and take this as an opportunity for him to learn and grow and, understand that, maybe he'll do some things with testing groups and focus groups and things like that going forward so that he doesn't make this mistake again. But thank you so much for adding that context again, Gypsy. And I'm going to go ahead and transition to the next topic, which is segment 2. But before I do, I want to ask all of you a question. Do you get value out of listening to Race Haven? If the answer is yes, I want to ask you to consider becoming a patron of the show for as little as $1 a month. Your support will assist in the growth and maintenance of the show, and I would greatly appreciate it. If you visit RaceHavenPodcast.com and you click on Become a Patron, you'll learn more about the goals that we have for the show and the cool perks that you can earn for supporting us towards achieving those goals and making the show better for all of you, the listeners. So with that being said, I'm going to segment to speak briefly about ESPN First Take segment titled Young Black Players Getting into Trouble. So if you want to get in on this segment and if you want to share your perspective, please call in now at 929-477-4107 and press 1 so that I know that you want to speak. So earlier, let's say today is Wednesday. I believe it was towards the end of last week, right around the NFL draft. ESPN's First Take is a show they have, and Stephen A. Smith, an African-American, and Max Kellerman, a European-American, are the hosts of the show along with Molly Querom, and I believe she's of European descent as well. I may be wrong on that, but I believe she is. And either way, they did this segment, and the segment was Young Black Players Getting into Trouble, and they spoke on that, and that segment really bothered me. And for me, I took offense to doing an entire segment about quote unquote young black, and they were talking about football players who are going into the NFL draft. I took issue with them doing an entire segment on young black players getting into trouble. And the reason why is because, again, nothing that happens in society happens in a vacuum. Okay. There's historical precedent that always has to be considered when doing anything. And in America, the historical precedent in the media is that African-American people, generally speaking, have always been scrutinized as a whole, as a group. And when it comes to scrutiny of other ethnicities, especially those of European descent who make up the majority of our population, it's always done from an individual level. I personally have never seen a segment about quote unquote white players, young white players getting into trouble. Or I've never seen anything about, young white students or young white professionals, or when the Wall Street bank situation happened, white executives, causing mass hysteria and pain across America. It's never grouped. It's never spoken to in that way. It's never grouped that way. And I take issue with that. And one of the ways I explain it in the past, I've explained it in the past and how I perceive it is like, as an African American, we're living in a fishbowl. And the masses of Americans are looking in on us. They're looking in on us. It's like African American people are in this fishbowl, and just millions and millions of people are just looking in and analyzing, poking, and prodding our every move, our every move, our every whatever. And that bothers me, because African American people are just as individual as any other people in this country, in this world. We're individuals. We are not the same. Like, we have different, all African American people don't share, similar things. And in terms of several different characteristics, socially, economically, or whatever. And, even when I hear people talking about the African American community, when I hear people speaking for the African American community, I cringe. And I'm not saying I've never said that. You may have caught me on a Race Haven episode at some point, saying, I don't think I have, but I'm just covering my bases here, that if I did say it just out of habit because it's been ingrained. But when I hear us in the African American community, I'm like, well, what is that? Where is this quote unquote African American community? Because when I drive around and I deal in my everyday life, I see African American people of all different walks of life, across the social economic board, across the educational, spectrum, across the education spectrum, across the, political spectrum, across the, career spectrum. African American people are embedded in every lane in society in general. So, when we speak to the ills, and here's the other thing, I know as a country, we speak to the ills of a segment, primarily low income, impoverished African American people. But when I hear people speak about the ills of that segment of Americans, it's as if they're speaking to it as it applies to all African Americans. And that's something I take issue with. But going back to, ESPN's First Take, I feel like, again, in the media, I feel like it's irresponsible to do a segment titled Young Black Players Getting into Trouble. And the reason why I feel that is because, again, it perpetuates this idea that people of African descent, those people who choose to commit crimes or who choose to get in trouble or just get in trouble, just for all the various reasons that people get in trouble, especially young people, teenagers, right? Teenagers and young adults in their early 20s, all the various reasons that they've gotten in trouble from all ethnicities throughout the entirety of human society, why they would lump young black players getting into trouble as a segment, it perpetuates the idea that when African American young people get in trouble, it's some type of worse type of trouble. When African American young people smoke weed, it's like this worst kind of smoking of weed. Or when African Americans, commit other crimes or, steal something or even in domestic abuse and all these various things that were highlighted in the draft process, is as if it's like 5 to 10 times worse. That's how I perceive it. And if you perceive it differently, I would love to hear from you. And because, and the reason I perceive it that way, and is because, again, I never see groups of, and I'm going to use just for example purposes, European Americans grouped in segments like that. If you went to any college that is predominantly European American, like the one I went to undergrad, and for all the graduating classes, if you took a percentage of the European American students, like the school I went to, which was 97% European American, and if we took a poll of all the students who got in trouble for drugs, or let's not say got caught, but all the students who took and used illegal drugs like cocaine or marijuana, all the students who drank alcohol under the age of 21, all the students who got in trouble for sexual abuse or rape, and all the students who were accused of, domestic abuse, and then stealing or any other, indiscrepancy that you want to name. If we went around to every college, major college and university, and we gathered those numbers, the news could have a field day with that. They could easily say that so-and-so college, I'll take a similar thing. Young white graduates of 2017 getting into trouble. But we never see that. And let's go down to high school. Because, again, European Americans still make up the majority of the population. So go to most high schools in America, especially in those that are in predominantly European American communities. And if we did the same thing and we looked at the graduating class only, we would find we would find a percentage of those individuals who have gotten in trouble. But we never see anything like that in the media. So some people may be listening and saying, but why are you comparing it, Scott? The reason I'm comparing it is, again, because you can't just look at this in a vacuum. You have to look at it throughout the course of history. And throughout the course of history, the media has misrepresented and sensationalized the missteps of African American people to feed into the socialized and indoctrination, the socialized norm and indoctrination that African American people are somehow less than European American people, are somehow more violent or more criminal than European American people. And this started during the days of slavery. This was one of the ways to maintain the ideas of white supremacy. It was one of the ways to maintain the idea that people of African descent were less human than people of European descent. This is one of the ways to indoctrinate the masses to continue to be apathetic towards something that's inhumane as slavery. So one of the ways that the powers and the wealthy landowners and the slave owners and the politicians during that time, they continued to perpetuate this system of slavery was by using the media to convince the masses that African people deserve the treatment they were getting. They deserve to be treated less than human. And one of the ways they did that is by highlighting the missteps of the very small percentage of African Americans who actually misstepped. They highlighted those and they made it seem like the norm. So when I see it today, it gets under my skin because I cannot believe that in 2017, some of those same tactics and some of those same things are being done. And here's the thing. Here's what I believe. I don't even think it's done with the same intent that it was done back then in all instances. But however, I know that because we've all been indoctrinated and conditioned into this society that was built on the idea of white supremacism and white normalcy and all the things that come with that, these behaviors, they simply get passed down. And it simply becomes a part of the cultural DNA. And it simply becomes a part of what the masses then crave. It's a story that the people crave. And again, subconsciously, it's just normal. When I say they crave it, it's like it's normal. I turn on the news and I see stories about people of African descent committing crimes and, being hyper, sensationalized about all the missteps within the quote unquote African American community, or these young African American people who are these thugs and they're these animals and they're this, that, and the other. And it feeds into that mindset that this country was built on. And subconsciously, we've all bought into it. Even African American people themselves, some, not all, have bought into it. I hear it myself all the time. That's actually where I'm going with segment 3. Is even African American people themselves buy into and accept it. I got a lot of pushback on Facebook. People saying, well, if they don't want to be in the news, then don't get in trouble. I'm like, are you serious? In my mind, I'm like, what do you mean? Like, do you have those same expectations for other people of other ethnicities? And if you don't have those same and if you do have those same expectations, why aren't you holding the news media accountable to being fair and balanced? Why aren't you holding them accountable to doing segments about when quote unquote white young people get in trouble? And the reason why, again, I want to make sure I'm unpacking this very well, and I'm going to go to this caller who's chiming in. But the reason why I wanted to give the example of the predominantly European American college is because people have said, well, the NFL is predominantly African American. So, of course, because they're predominantly African American, if we're going to focus in on the transgressions of that group, that segment of people, the majority of the people committing the transgressions are going to be African American, because within that segment, within that segment of society, they're mostly African American people. And my point is, you can go to any subsegment of society where there's a majority of any ethnicity, and you're going to get similar statistics in terms of those who are committing the transgressions in society. It's just, for whatever reason, people commit transgressions, okay? But all I see in the media is African-American people who commit transgressions being highlighted in the way that ESPN did by saying young black players getting into trouble and doing a whole segment on it. And I believe Stephen A. Smith thought that he was talking righteous and schooling and doing something good. I don't think that he realized that he's actually hurting African-American people. In my opinion, hurting the young African-American people that he thinks that he's helping by perpetuating the idea that, again, young African-American people are just inherently more criminal, which then turns over into some of the disproportionate policing that we see in the African-American community, the disproportionate shootings of young African-American men in society, all these things, all these, all the indoctrination and everything I just unpacked, it plays in to what we see in the criminal justice system and how the police in general engage with young African-American men. And the media plays a huge part in that. So I want to go to the caller. The last four digits of your number is 7955. Please state your name, where you're calling in from, and please share your perspective or your questions.
Hey, what's going on, Sky? It's D'Amicos, Courage Coach.
D'Amicos, how you doing, man? Thanks for calling in.
Calling from Atlanta. Hey, no problem, brother. So I haven't watched the segment that you're referring to regarding to the black athletes always getting in trouble, but I do watch the sports channel every day. And what you see, especially from like Stephen A. Smith, a great problem of mine is that, he comes from like the school of a lot of older traditional blacks, which is to they believe in order to build the black person up or empower black people is to continue to denigrate them, break them down, tell them where they're weak at. And the problem I have with that is that there's never equal balance of empowerment. It's never well, you're failing here, but you're also improving in this area. So there's no no positive reinforcement along with the negative critique. And so that's where my huge problem comes in, that when I'm even listening to people such as Stephen A. Smith, or when I'm going to any event and I know it's going to be regarding around the issue of black empowerment. When it comes to these athletes, I often see him specifically more harder on black people, black athletes, black coaches than any other racial group type of person. And so what you'll have is these athletes, these black athletes, these young black athletes, because I mentor a lot as well, they'll grow up and they'll say, you'll hear them regurgitate words such as, don't mess with the white women because, that's a guaranteed, jail bid, going to prison. You'll hear these black kids having to be extra cautious of their actions off the field because they know they're going to be ridiculed and punished more severely than their white counterparts. Meanwhile, their white counterparts are chewing tobacco on the field, getting into all kinds of trouble, drinking and driving, able to live a more freer lifestyle, less constrained lifestyle than their black counterparts. And so the huge issue that I have is when you watch that's why I rarely watch sports, and I actually love watching Skip and Shannon, because Shannon, he even though he's kind of old school Southern, he still comes the way his approach is more empowering to listen to rather than continuous negative critique, because we know we're in a bad predicament. But even me being a professional coach and how I work with clients through their trauma, I can never get a person to transform and rise from their trauma by continuously impeding upon them how much they failed throughout life, how much wrong they've done. I have to always remind them on how powerful and how strong they are so that they gather the strength within themselves to rise out of their negative place, i.e. depression.
Right.
Sorry.
Let me jump in really quick, if you don't mind, because I want to ask a question specifically. Something you said brought up something for me, and I want you to speak to it if you don't mind. Because everything you're saying, man, it resonates with me 100% in terms of, this is what I hear, and this is the pushback that I hear. And as with you being African American, I know you've heard this as well. Because we know that they scrutinize people of European descent generally, or society generally, and the system that we live in generally. Because a lot of times when we talk about systems, there's African people and Asian people and Native people who work for and within those systems who perpetuate the same oppressions within that particular system. So it's not just European American people. So with that being said, those people in those systems, they do overly scrutinize young African American people and African American people in general, depending on what we're talking about. So because we know that, that's why I am so hard on you. That's why if I'm being Stephen A. Smith, I can hear someone, like you said, that old school person who's like, that's why I am 10 times harder on you, because you know what, quote unquote, we are up against. And again, and I just have to, because I do this on this show, most of the time when I'm talking about we, it's generally, especially young African-American people who are coming up in impoverished situations where they don't have the levels of support and financial backing to get them out of trouble if something were to go wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So it's generally the target in these situations is usually not just young African-American men, but poor or low income, young African-American men when we're talking about the we. So with that being said, that's the pushback. So what do you say to those people, who say that, I'm doing it because I care?
Okay. All right. Well, let me respond to that. Again, one, as being a young black male in this country, because I'm 28 now, and also being a professional that works in the mental health, capacity, both with older adults. My oldest client is 53, and with I mentor young children, teenage boys specifically. Whenever I hear that explanation, I hear that kickback. What that sounds like to me, that sounds like one operating out of trauma and fear more than one operating out of care, love, compassion, understanding, and empowerment. See, the thing is that we live in, there's a theory called, I'm sure you've heard of this, the crooked room theory. And it's you're so accustomed to living in this unhealthy, crooked environment, this crooked perspective of life, skewed way of life. You're so accustomed to living in it for so long that you think stepping out of it and seeing the world for what it truly is, you think something's wrong with the whole entire world. You think the whole entire world has it wrong. And you think what you've been doing for so long is the right way. This is why, and that steps into a larger conversation I don't want to get into right now. But I think my whole feedback would be like, I would question the mental health of that person, because there's a great book called The Black Male Handbook by Kevin Powell, the author of Vibe magazine. And in it, he talks about his early years in high school when he was in the lunchroom. He was schooling the black kids. Just that he was saying that he was regurgitating the exact same message. This was in the 70s. The exact same message that we're talking about now, of how coming down on them, telling them what they're failing, telling them how the white man is keeping them down, blah, blah, blah. And he said, he went to his mentor and said, man, I was killing him. I was hitting with those points and boom, 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 boom. And his mentor stopped him and said, why are you talking? He said, basically he said that, is that a way to talk to someone that you love? Is that a way to talk to your brother, someone you want to uplift, by making them feel even more oppressed about the hardships that are already existing in their life? So you don't motivate people. That's strong. You can't motivate people through, and that was empowering for me at the moment, because I was same. When you step into becoming newly black conscious, you develop anger and animosity, and you're learning you become super empowered to where it goes to your head, and you start to make others feel inferior, and you can't teach and inspire others from a level of inferiority. You will just suppress. Then you'll start to brainwash. So whenever I hear old school black men, or even young black men who buy into that old school belief and ritual, I clearly see that they're still operating out of a place of trauma, pain, abandonment, all the ills of life that they left unresolved. Because you don't talk to someone you love, you want to empower, you care about, with those that same type of vindictive attitude, demeanor. So.
Man, I appreciate you. I appreciate you adding that context, and that's some great context. I'm so glad you called in because I want to just add a few things before we go to our next segment. But thanks for calling in, D'Amicos, man. You please call in again. Your work in mental health and being a fear coach and everything is so relevant to this conversation because all of it's in terms of like history and mental health and all these various things, they intersect. Systems thinking, education, et cetera, all intersects. And we, one of the things that I believe in is that we can't keep learning in silos and talking in silos across these various, disciplines. We have to figure out a way to speak to all of them as if they're all in one and the same. And a lot of people are doing that. But I appreciate, I just want to add that, you bringing that context in was very great, was very good and very healthy because, you hit the nail on the head, man. You hit the nail on the head talking about people speaking out of their trauma. And one of the things that I try to bring through this show is just empathy. And empathy goes both ways. I also empathize for those individuals like the Stephen A. Smiths. Instead of, just railing on them, I empathize, and I take issue with a lot of things that Stephen A. Smith says, and I've ranted, and I wrote a blog post, and I've ranted on him several times. But I also just add that I'm empathetic because he's also speaking out of trauma. What we are coming out of as a nation is so complex and it's so traumatizing, and it's totally, hurt us all in some way. It's impacted us all, no matter your ethnicity. The system of white supremacy and the systems of slavery and systemic racism, which, again, were all built on the ideal of white supremacy and also capitalism as it's unfolded in this country. All those things have damaged us and traumatized all of us in some ways. Some of us are conscious and aware of some of them. Some of us are not. But that doesn't mean that we all haven't been impacted. And in the ways that we've been impacted, they manifest themselves in so many different ways, and we're speaking to one of them. So I just want to just encourage empathy and let everyone know listening to this that everything I just stated, I empathize with Stephen A. Smith and what he's trying to do by highlighting these things. And even the people who came onto my thread on Facebook who said, well, they just shouldn't get in trouble because what, quote unquote, we are up against. And I push back against that because I believe that what I'm fighting for through this platform, I'm fighting for humanity, for every person. And the humanity for every person as individuals, it rejects the grouping and the negative grouping, and it rejects having to conform to these oppressive ideals that somehow, as a whole, African-American people have to be 10 times greater and 10 times better and in terms of, those who commit transgressions and have to be 10 times human. Really, that's what it's saying. They have to be 10 times human. And of course, I'm speaking in the generalization because most African-American people, just like most people in general, are not out here committing crimes, are not out here getting into trouble. However, I reject the idea that for those who do, that they somehow, A, represent all African-Americans. That's crap. I reject it. And B, when they do commit that transgression, I reject the idea that they're making all African-Americans look bad. I'm not buying into that. and also, again, that they have to be scrutinized at a higher, rate in the media and grouped together, as why do all these young black players keep getting in trouble as an example. I think the media should just stop doing stuff like that. If you want to talk about players getting in trouble, talk about players getting into trouble. But it's the moment they had to add black to it, again, that speaks to a tradition of doing that, a tradition of grouping African-American people in that way. So I hope it makes sense. Thanks to Mikos for, adding some context. I hope that makes sense to the listeners. If not, call in, send me an inbox message, email me at solutions@RaceHavenPodcast.com. Let's continue to learn. Let's continue to unpack all of these things so that we can, grow closer together and get out of polarization, get out of sensationalism, get out of, us versus them, right versus wrong, and understand that all this stuff is very gray, it's very complex, it's very nuanced. And, we just have to reject, some of this, again, the divisive polarization that in debate-based society that we live in, right versus wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to go ahead and jump into segment 3. And in segment 3, it's kind of building on, segment 2, because I say here that I'm going to unpack my thoughts on what I perceive to be the unnecessary chastising of African-American people in the media and by other African-American people. So I just spoke to it in the media, so I won't, touch on that any further. But I am going to talk about what I believe to be the unnecessary chastising of African-American people by other African-American people. And again, the Miko's already set the table in stating that it's done out of the historical trauma. We've been socialized into these positions, and we have to talk our way out of. We have to learn our way out of these things, because I believe that they're damaging in so many ways. That's my belief, and I know that others will have different contexts that can expand on my belief and my perspectives, and I'm always open to that. But I want to give 2 examples of what I'm speaking of. The first one is I attended a family member's graduation this past weekend at Florida A&M University, historically African-American college and university. And it's a family tradition. Literally, there hasn't been a generation on that side of my family, my father's side of the family, starting with my grandfather, that someone hasn't graduated from FAMU. So with that being said, it's a family tradition. But one of my sister's friends got on her post about us being at graduation, and he wrote this: "Family tradition and education for a Black family is so rare, and when it's shared, it's so awesome." So me personally, when I read that, me being who I am, I pushed back a little bit. He didn't intend it I'm sure he didn't think that anybody was going to push back on what he said. But what I pushed back against was the idea that family tradition and education for a Black family is so rare. Again, similar to what I spoke about when it comes to First Take. There's this idea that we have to group and highlight certain things as being unique to African people of African descent in ways that I feel like they come from a position of trauma. They come from, in some instances, a position of an inferiority complex, again, that we've been socialized into. And my thing is, if he would have said a family tradition and education is so rare, that's a true statement as well. When you look at the overall statistics of people in America who actually go on to get college degrees, which I did, I looked it up. And the reality is, across all ethnicities, most people don't go to college. So you know what that means? A family tradition and education for any family is rare. So for him to say, like, especially for a Black family is so rare, what I hear when I hear people say stuff like that is, so it's not rare for European Americans, it's not rare for Asian Americans, it's not rare for Latin Americans. And generally speaking, most of the time when people make these type of comparisons, we're being honest, they're talking about, it's always compared to European people of European descent in America. And now, I'm not talking about the number of, people of European people versus African people in America who actually go to college and graduate, because those percentages are higher, but for obvious reasons. Again, historically speaking, we're not looking at this in a vacuum. There's reasons why. So my thing is, when people say that, it's almost as if it's like a surprise. Like, why is it shouldn't be a surprise that more people of European descent are going on and graduating from college for the economic reasons as well as the historical educational reasons in terms of how all that has shaped out in our country. We know the history, at least a lot of us, I'm assuming, who are listening to this podcast, we know the history. We know the discrepancies. We know the inequities. So it's almost like a shot, the way I hear it, it's like a shot at African-American people when people make those distinctions in that way. When we understand why our numbers aren't on par, why there's a gap between African-American people and European-American people in this country. We know why. So I don't feel like it needs to be highlighted in that way. And here's the thing. I'm not saying this person meant it that way, but what I'm saying is there's something subconscious that I've noticed since I've been thinking about this stuff for years, and I've been noticing this type of language for years, that African-American people, when someone or a group of people do something good, they kind of highlight and make a statement like, especially for an African-American person to do that is amazing. And so that's something I push back on it because for the reason I just shared. And I'm going to give another example. And all I did when I say I pushed back, all I did was highlight the fact that, it's rare, for all families, not just African Americans. I just wanted to add that to the thread to give people something else to think about, just to broaden perspectives. The other thing that I wrote about this week, and my good friend and the host of the Mental Dialogue podcast and radio show, as well as the Mental Dialogue, the founder of the Mental Dialogue community, Montoya Smith, who's been a regular contributor on this podcast as well. And he's gonna jump on in a second to share his perspective. But he pushed back against something I had to say, and I want to hear his perspective on it. So basically, I shared a post about how a young African American woman, about 25 years old, shared with me that a white coworker was schooling her. This is her words. A white coworker was schooling her on savings and investments, and then she said to me, we don't save and invest. We are all about show money and being flashy. This is what the African American woman said to me, Scott. She said, after telling me that this European American coworker schooled her on savings and investments, she then turned around and said to me, you know what, Scott, we don't save and we, quote unquote, we, here we go with that again. We don't save and invest. We are all about show money and being flashy. So then Scott, quickly interjected that you mean some don't, because personally, I know many, many, many African American people who are fiscally responsible. My grandfather schooled me from a young age about money and budgeting and the importance of savings and all these various things. And I know a lot of African American people that are fiscally responsible. I know a lot of African American people that aren't fiscally responsible as well. However, it's similar to something that D'Amico said earlier. He says that when people make these critiques from the negative perspective, they don't balance it out with the other side. It's always just this broad generalization speaking to a negative trait about African American people from other African American people that I take issue with. It bothers me. It gets under my skin. I don't understand how she can say, I'm sorry, I do understand it. I'm just being honest and saying it bothers me. But when she says we don't save and invest, what do you mean? Now, when I reflect, I understand that most people, when they make generalizations, they're speaking about their personal perspective based on the people that they came up around and the people they grew up around, their environment and all these variables. However, I hear people speak and generalize their perspective based on their background and their upbringing and their environment and their variables, and they project that out for all African American people so much. And that's, again, what I'm pushing back against. So Montoya, I'll let him jump in because he took issue with me saying, many, many, many. And I contend that that's a true statement, but that doesn't mean I'm not also acknowledging that many don't. I understand that many don't. But the main point, the main thing that I'm pointing out and the main thing I'm pushing back against is that the chastisement. And because I know some people hate comparing it in some instances, but I don't have any other comparison. And I have never heard anyone from another ethnic group generalize about, quote unquote, other people that share their ethnic background and their cultural background. I've never heard them generalize and chastise their group the way that I hear African people do it. People of African descent in America do it. And I'm trying to understand. I do understand why D'Amico spoke to it, but I'm trying to bring voice to it. I'm trying to talk about it. I'm trying to speak to some of the nuance behind it. When I speak, just so everyone's listening, and Montoya's about to jump on, so I'm saying this to him, I don't speak to be right. This is me speaking in a sense of, again, I'm thinking out loud. It's like colleagues working together for common solutions. So when you call me, you inbox me, you email me, don't come on trying to debate with me because that's not my goal. I don't want to argue with you. Build on what I'm saying. If you see some holes in what I'm saying, share it. But again, I'm just speaking my truth and my understanding and my perspective in a way towards solutions. And I hope that other people can simply build on, point out some holes and expand, and let's keep this thing moving forward instead of getting stuck in right versus wrong or, picking holes in what I'm saying. Let's build on it. So I'll close out with this point, and Montoya, you could jump in with, I feel like African American people chastise other African American people and make broad generalizations far too often on the negative side without balancing it out. And they don't, and that's, I guess that's the point. And when I say I feel that way, I hear that Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas dinners, family gatherings, et cetera, et cetera. I hear these conversations and these type of these things, and they make me cringe, and I'm always pushing back. But okay, Montoya, I'll let you jump in with your thoughts on this.
Hey, thanks a lot, Scott. Amazing show. I mean, let me say that first and foremost. The show has been absolutely excellent.
Thanks, man.
Start there. I would like for you, as you say, we're trying to build on a conversation. We're not here to debate. So I'm trying, one thing that, we constantly kind of have this conversation, you and I, and you say, let's do it live on the air, but I'm always glad to do. One thing that I slightly will caution you against is to become aware of your pushback is sometimes using the exact same generalization that the other person is using. So I just want you to kind of conceptualize that. Your pushback that you say, for example, is true, is sometimes a generalization that in some cases, if you peel back the number, and that's, me, I'm always talking about being factual when it applies. Like, here's an area where you and I agree, and I want to share this with you so we can, people can understand we're not debating here. So, for example, I'm going to add a little nuance to your previous segment, and it'll make sense for this segment. So, for example, I am 100% agreement with you what happened with the First Take segment on the black players. I'm 100% in agreement with you. Here's the nuance to that. So the nuance to that actual situation is, as you said, it's very normalized in this country to over-criminalize African-American in general and especially African-American men. So that segment, as you said, added to this narrative that has existed, as you said, since the beginning of the enslavement period. Well, there may be some people that are listening to you saying, well, don't blacks commit more crimes and these things? They may be thinking that. Here's the nuance for why that particular show absolutely an advocate of this narrative unfairly. Because when you peel back the situation with NFL players, which is specifically highlighted, here's a situation where NFL players actually commit crimes at a lower rate than the regular public, for one. And then when you actually consider just arrest over the last 17 years, you're talking about less than 3% of African Americans specifically are even arrested, less much convicted, and however far that goes. So my point is, this segment actually takes and highlights something that's actually a non-issue in the NFL, but is used to perpetuate something as a part of larger society that's basically non-existent. If we know that NFL players actually commit crimes less than the public, we understand they're on TV and they're highlighted, so we get that point, especially when a specific incident happens, such as a Ray Rice or whatever the case may be. Okay, they're on TV, so they highlight it. That kind of comes with the territory of being a professional athlete. So we get that part, but to actually take a segment to act as if this is a real issue, as you've alluded to and made great examples for, it's ridiculous when you actually look at the real numbers. So, again, that's why I agree with you 100%. Now, let me flip where you and I take issue in this last thing that you spoke to. So what happens is there are some conversations, you're right, people can sit around Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, and just kind of complain and generalize and make these blanket statements just to kind of, I'm losing my word here, but basically just kind of overgeneralize about how we are as a people. So
right.
Here's why I challenge you. In certain conversations, I would ask that you be particular in your response when, in fact, the numbers show something different. So, for example, I'll give you a specific example so you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. So, you are a listener of my show, and I remember this is a specific example, and I'll think it, and I'll let you jump in after this. So we had a specific example where we had a brother who offers insurance, and he was talking about a particular product that was encouraging our community, black community specifically, that they should have more insurance because the numbers in comparison to other communities we don't have as much insurance as others, right or wrong. That's a reality. So he was basically talking about a specific product in which he was saying, this makes sense. It's relatively cheap, and, here's your opportunity to take care of your family generationally if you buy into this product. I'm not endorsing the product personally, but anyway, this is what was being said on the show. And so he talked about how much trouble he had going to other African Americans. He was talking specifically to get them to buy into this product. And he ended up saying, and you took issue with this, he ended up saying when he shows this same product to white people who don't know about it, they jump on it immediately. And I remember you took offense because you felt like, oh, wow, here's a generalization that's unfair. And as you naturally do, you naturally push back. And I just want to say to you, in that specific example, we're having obviously we were having a conversation to say, hey, this is something that you need. There are other coaches who can easily see the advantages of it. So in pointing it out, he wasn't making a generalization. He was talking about specifically how he gets customers of other ethnic groups to buy into it much easier than our own. That is a reality. I've been in sales. I've been faced with that. So if I were to say that, in that situation, he wasn't generalizing. I'll kind of let you jump in like that.
Okay, yeah, just to clarify, he said he made a more definitive statement. He made more of a definitive statement along the lines of, but black people don't save. It was something like strong like that. It wasn't the way you just kind of put it.
I specifically remember him saying, and you took issue with it. He specifically said that, and I think you missed that he was talking about his own interaction. Because we say it so often, I think you heard as him making a generalization. So it's okay. It's okay because it happens so often. So I'm not trying to, I'm just letting you know. I'm just adding clarification. Because when you came on the show, and we talked, it wasn't so much when you came on the show, when we talked after the fact. That's how I realized you heard him speaking as typical, as most people will often, make these generalizations. I'm just letting you know, in that specific example, we were talking to our community specifically, and he was literally saying when he presents that same product to whites, they jump on it. You heard the they and thought he was making a generalization. And I'm just saying there are times when it does matter in nuance that you don't generalize back in order for us to make steps forward, in my opinion.
All right, so let me speak on everything you just said. So, regardless of how I heard what he said, I did push back against the generalization, and here's why. In general, it's 2 points I want to make, but I guess I'll make that one first. In general, when speaking about just that example you just gave, but really like all these examples. When African American people, those who do generalize in this way, when giving an example about something that African American people may be deficient in, generally speaking, not all African Americans, or something that is negative about the culture for some culturally that some people within the African American culture may do, or behaviors or whatever that some, not all, do. But when I hear African American people at the dinner table speaking as if it's just the norm for, again, in a general way, the issue I take in addition to it just being a generalization, and most people in general speaking across all people, we all kind of speak in generalizations, and I'm an advocate for like unpacking and speaking more complexity. If we're going to solve, one of the things I like to say is if we're going to learn to solve complex problems, we got to start speaking in complexity. But with that being said, what I'm generally pushing back against is I don't hear the level of empathy that I feel like is necessary when people are saying these things. So using the example you gave, so when the gentleman was speaking, it came off as a chastisement. This is the way I took it. I'm not saying he meant it that way, but I'm saying this is the way that Scott hears it, and it may be because of my trauma, whatever I'm dealing with. But when I heard him speaking about how African Americans don't take advantage of these particular insurance products, but then contrasting it with how certain European Americans do, I think that's unfair. Because now, again, that's a sensitive area for African American people. Because, again, when he said it, he didn't speak with the level of empathy in terms of, I know why African American people, generally speaking, may not be as trustworthy because of our history of being misled financially, our history of not having the level of education or the ability to navigate the complexity behind some of these products, because that level of nuance and understanding finance and things hasn't been passed down through enough generations yet, generally speaking. And also, just again, we've, generally speaking, African Americans have been taken advantage of in so many ways. I don't hear that level of empathy in his tone. In that particular conversation and in other conversations, it's more of a tone of, I don't know why y'all don't get it. It's more of a tone of, no one, he didn't say it, or other people don't say it. Y'all stupid for not getting it. That's the tone I'm hearing. It's not a tone of empathy. It's not a tone of, let me nurture you. It's not a tone of, let me nurture you past your trauma. Let me nurture you past your lack of understanding. Let me nurture you past, the fear you may have for all the reasons that we know why historically. And then I feel like to double down and compare it to what European Americans do is so unfair. And it's something that's been done and used against us, that stick right there that has been used against us, going all the way back to the first segment of what Gypsy talked about with the hair normalcy. So because of the trauma of what African Americans have had to do or continually have to do to assimilate to a culture of quote unquote white normalcy, and a culture and the systems that were built on a system of white supremacism, and all the things that African people have had to do to assimilate to all of those things, for another African American person to use that stick, I take issue with that as well, because it just adds to the pain. It adds to the trauma. Like, you're comparing me to them. And then on top of that, again, when we unpack that, a lot of, not all, but a lot of European Americans, a larger percentage of European Americans do have a history and a heritage of a certain level of financial literacy that has been passed down, because they've had more access to that information. They have more trust because all of the systems were designed with them in mind, so they automatically trust systems more, et cetera, et cetera. We know why a larger percentage of European Americans do accept certain things easier. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I absolutely respect your passion. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. It makes a whole lot of sense. I actually understand your pushback a little more in hearing what you just said.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely. So,
can I
again? Okay, go ahead, brother. Make your second point. Go ahead. No, please finish.
Yeah, because I said I had a second point too. So
yeah. Please go ahead.
The other thing that you said was, and this is, I pulled this down from Facebook. This is what your comment was. You said, I will continue to challenge you to be more consistent in correcting others' generalizations, but your response is a relative generalization that is often less accurate than the generalization you are attempting to correct. So then you go on to say, I agree that words matter, and offline I'll give you real history why your focus on the exceptions can be very detrimental to our community, and you capitalize OUR, our community. I'm first to highlight our achievements, but continuously overplaying them in the wrong circles only serves to reinforce some of the same narratives we both hate. So I want you to comment on that when I give my thoughts real quick. So the other thing I wanted to say, when you push back at me and you say that my statement is a generalization, and you said I'm pushing back against a generalization that is more accurate. When this young lady said to me that we don't save and invest, we is an absolute. That means anyone who looks like she and I were looking at each other at that moment, we don't save and invest. That's an absolute statement. When I come back and I said many, 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 that's not an absolute. There's wiggle room in many. And that's all I ask people to do. I ask people to use words like many, some, not all, a lot, etc. So what I didn't understand is that when you push back at me, Montoya, and said that I'm generalizing in a different direction, I'm thinking to myself, but I didn't. Just because I said many, many, many 3 times, I'm still, I didn't say no. I didn't say to her, what do you mean? We do save and we do invest. If I would have said that, that's an absolute. I said many, many, many to highlight that there's a lot, but it's still not all. So I want you, I just wanted to add that. And then I want you to speak to how I may be, what I'm saying and what I'm doing may be detrimental.
Right. All right, cool. So you here's an area where you've contradicted yourself on this show. So you actually realize it said when you were talking about how we need to speak to complexities, you actually mentioned earlier in the segment that people speak in generalizations. So you're very aware of it. And now your pushback on her we, which you admitted you know she does not mean all. Like I've told you, you'll never hear me ever mean all. Anytime I say we, us, they, it makes no sense because once you speak in a absolute, one exception kills it. So we just admitted people speak in generalization. So generally speaking, if you can concede what you just said earlier, she meant it generally. Okay, so let's give her that. Well, you know, because it rubs you the wrong way, you hear it as an absolute. You do this, in my opinion, quite often because of good reasons. You just gave me some good reasons for why we shouldn't do it as much, and I'm okay with that. But I do want you to be aware of you keep hearing these absolutes when you just admitted people speak in generalizations. So let's go there.
Okay.
Secondly,
let me jump before you go to the. Can I jump there before you go to the other part about our community? Because I want us to unpack that a little more. So because I said this to you about a year ago, and I want our listeners to hear this. This was a personal conversation. The reason why I think it's so important to get away from people saying we and just us as adults saying we know she means it as a generalization is because I'm always thinking about the next generation. So when I'm sitting around the Thanksgiving table, what I'm thinking to myself is those 6, 7, and 8-year-olds, they're hearing we. And I'm concerned with how they're internalizing that. I'm concerned that they're internalizing those we because children are very general. They're very literal. And for the listeners, I have a doctorate in education. Like, this is my space. I read a ton of books on child psychology. I'm passionate about it. And I understand how children think. And I have 2 little children, and they ask questions when they hear things. So I know how they're internalizing things. So one of the main reasons that I ask you, the listener, when you hear me say that we need to get away from speaking in generalizations, because we have a lot of complex problems in this world. And if we're going to solve complex problems, we have to learn how to think in complexity. I never speak in generalizations around my children, and I take longer to explain things, and it may be a little uncomfortable and tedious, but it's because I want their minds to be wired in a way that is thinking and that automatically thinks in a way that unpacks things and not in generalizations. Because I know that as for my 5-year-old, if he sits at the table and he hears a statement like this, you know, we black people are always getting in trouble. In his little mind, he's looking and he says, okay, I'm what's considered, even though my kids, they don't think of themselves as black because of my thoughts on that. But if he hears it as, you know, okay, I'm African-American, and so we always get in trouble, and people that look like me, we always get in trouble. Okay, so we're the trouble people. It's like that can go a lot of places. Let's put it like that. That can go, for a young person internalizing that can go a lot of places. And that's a whole nother conversation in terms of my dealings with young elementary kids and how I feel like some of them have internalized some of those messages and how they manifest themselves in our communities and in the real world. But I think that plays into some of the self-hate that I perceive within certain segments of the African-American community. It's a lot of these generalizations in the way that they're always used from a negative standpoint, not always, but oftentimes used in a negative standpoint. So that's the reason why, again, I push back against saying we know that she made a generalization, is because I'm thinking about the next generation, and I'm asking for all of us who are trying to move the culture forward to think about it from that standpoint. We got to start unpacking these things so that our young people can start thinking in these complex ways right from a young age.
So, all right. So that's an area, like I actually agree with you, especially, again, in a conversation where there are younger people in the room. A lot of that trauma and those continual conversations come because those, as you said, those same young people have heard that all their lives. So that's an area in which I understand you completely. But, again, I still will challenge you specifically, you know, don't hear we as an absolute when you also know that people are not being absolute when they're speaking. And then in a room of adults, you make these same challenges and as if they're being absolute. So when I'm not being absolute, your challenge, in my opinion, should not be as if, one, I'm being absolute, and then two, here's the area where I've always thought you've missed. You're unaware that your response is a generalization. So even in that particular, if there's two adults in the room, there's no kids that can hear you. Even if she said it just between you and her. So when she says we don't invest, and you say, well, many, you're generalizing back, especially when the numbers, the real numbers, and here it is, when they don't show, is many. If we find out 5% do compared to 95%, that's not many. You're generalizing back. And the thing is, I'm not trying to point you out on that one conversation. Here's the bigger picture when I say how it can hurt us. Let's get to the bigger picture versus, doing that nuance. The bigger picture is this. So the bigger picture is what happens is there are areas, and this is why you may hear someone, like a Corey Beal who you heard on the show, speak the way that he did. There are areas, unfortunately, in our community, and this is a reality, I hope you can at least agree to this, that there are areas where I love empathizing just as you do. But there are also areas where we're hurting, where we're not paying attention to it to actually move the needle. So, for example, whereas I agree with you on the NFL things for the reasons I've already told you, well, in an area such as poverty, for example, for example, so when you find out the actual real numbers, and for example, when you're saying many, which ends up being just relative to your surrounding, but the actual numbers in our community are much different. The reality is much lower than many. For Atlanta, for example, if you know that 80% of African-American children are living in poverty, in Atlanta specifically, and that's a real number based on the Annie Case Foundation. I think I'm saying it correctly. I'm just saying, for example, if you find that out and we're in a room where we're speaking to that reality, that's not a generalization at that point. We're speaking to that reality to address it. Here's how it comes to hurt us if we spend time pinpointing, well, it's not all. In that conversation, it ends up bogging down that particular conversation, and here's how it's played out in a bigger context. I'll give you a great example, and I know you're not political, but here's a real-life example of how it's played out. So, obviously, the majority of the African-American community takes major contention with how Trump speaks to our community. I personally contention with it. I'm an independent voter. Like I said, I know politics is not your thing, but I'll say the perfect example of it, and then like I said, I've been on your show where I've taken issue with things he said, but the perfect example of it was that right before the election where he says to our community, your schools are hurting, you don't have jobs, what else do you have to lose? And so clearly a lot of African Americans were very, very hurt and bothered and upset that he would say such a thing. And so, anyway, he gets the presidency. He becomes president. He has Jim. We had a conversation. We had Jim Brown come through, Steve Harvey come through. So a lot of community said, "Hey, he's not even talking to the right people." Well, here's how that statement of how he spoke to us took precedence over some real numbers for us. So what happened was he eventually met with the Black Caucus and some other guy, I don't know his name. They're only concerned how he speaks to the community. But when I say they're only concerned, these particular people that I'm talking about, because they're in the percentage of our community that's maybe doing okay. They're in that percentages. So they can look around themselves like you can and say, why are you – they literally say, you got to learn to speak better. Like literally that's what they said to Trump in this room, come to find out, once the information came out publicly. So they're concerned about that, while in the meantime, the majority of our schools in our community are really hurting. We have jobless rates of over 50% for our teenagers in these major urban areas. And their number one concern was based on don't speak to us because that's not all of us. So I'm telling you, there are times where you can look around you in your relative thinking, and Atlanta's the perfect example of it because we're the number one city for income inequality. So you can look around circles and see what you think is many, many, many. You peel back the numbers, and it ain't many. And I'll say this and let you speak. If for every dollar, and I know you hate the comparisons, but it is something that has to be compared. You can't always lump it together economically when the difference shows here's a real issue, and often it is related to the situation with white supremacy that you and I both agree needs to be removed. But the nuance of lumping things together sometimes does not allow us to attack the real issue. And the example is this: for every dollar of wealth, and we know the differences. Yes, you speak to that all the time. We have that the Caucasian community has. We have 6 cents. But when you look at the history and see that number has not progressed, and you unfortunately speak to that number progressing, what if the numbers show they're not? Our housing rate in Atlanta right now is lower than it was in the 30s during the Depression for African Americans. So when those are the real numbers, I don't know what many you're talking about, brother.
Okay. So I appreciate you unpacking all of that. All great points. And, again, for me, it's like two separate conversations. And I think on the one level, it's, what I pushed back for what she said, it was just, for the reasons I expressed, in terms of pushing back. And like D'Amico said, they don't balance it out. There was no balance. And I just want to hear balance, and I want to hear empathy. That's the bottom line. I feel like I want to hear balance in people's, expressions of these things. And I want to hear a level of empathy for the historical, for the historical reasons why, the historical context, why, when we're talking about, generally speaking, when we pull these group numbers, why they are the way they are. So that was that. And again, in terms of me, saying many, and your pushback against that, again, let's go beyond that, because again, many is not a number. I didn't give any percentage. I didn't give anything. I just said many. That could mean a lot of different things. So to go beyond that, to your point about the let's just call it the wealth gap or whatever. All good points. I mean, it's real. I mean, we know that generally speaking, when we compare groups, African-American people, again, because of historical context, when you pull together resources, we're far behind. When I say we, I'm speaking about people of African descent who are descendant of enslaved Africans in America. So what you're saying is, when I speak to, and I want to say that many people are saving and many people are investing, I don't think that the issue is that I made a false statement, because that's a true statement as well. Because again, I didn't give a percentage. I didn't say a number. I didn't say, the majority. I didn't say anything like that.
That's a generalization, though. I mean, many are general. Because you tell her she should say some. So if you come back and say many, then you're not being fair. If she do say she should say some, then if she says some, you should let her be. But you say many. You're both using it the same way. You gotta be consistent. I'm just saying you said she said something, but the thing is, Scott, I know you will still give the pushback. You always do. Even when I tell you I never mean all, you still give me the pushback. I never mean all.
Right,
and
but let's not go back. We're going backwards now. We're going backwards because I've already said why.
You can't dismiss your many though. You can't dismiss it. You're dismissing it. That's not cool. Your many is,
man, you just threw me off my thought pattern too. You just threw me off my thought pattern.
That's a generalization, Scott, though. At least that's a generalization.
The time is running down. Let me finish. We're running out of time. So, and again, I'm going to speak to what you just said, because again, because we're going backwards. What I push back is against the absolute of a statement like we. If she would have said some, I wouldn't have pushed back. You said I would have. I'm saying I wouldn't.
Okay.
And when I say, again, it's a difference to me, and I express that we as an absolute, many, that leaves room. Some leaves room. It leaves room.
Most. Does most
leaves room.
Yeah,
no, most leaves room. I'm okay with most. I'm okay with many. Okay. I'm okay with most African American people or most European American. I'm okay with that, because that's not all. That's not all. So that's all I push back against. I just push back when people speak in a way that means that says all, even if they don't mean all. If you speak in a way that says all, that's what I push back against, and I gave the reasons why. But going forward, so what I'm trying to unpack and say is that, again, when I say many, and I hope I can bring this thought process back, but when I said many, I'm not speaking to in that scenario. That was just in that scenario, and it's actually a true statement. It's a true statement. It's a true generalization because it's open for interpretation, I guess. And if you want to push back against that, let's push it to the side.
Come on, man.
Let's push it to the side.
You got to get that to the other person. Then you got to get that to the other side. Then.
But we only have 10 minutes. That's why I can't really get it. I don't understand. We got to do this offline because our signals are crossed. Let's just say that, because I'm telling you, yes, it's a generalization, but I left it open for interpretation versus it being an absolute. I don't understand why you can't get that, but we're going to have that. Don't cut me off. Let me finish. Let me finish because we're running out of time. So we can get that offline. But again, it was a true generalization that left room for interpretation, etc. Now, on the next level, on the next lane, which is something totally different, is when you want to talk about, the gaps, whether it be the achievement gap in education, whether it be the social economic gap, et cetera, that's a different conversation. And how that's used politically, again, I understand what you said about what Donald Trump said, et cetera, and how that's used. I get it. That's a whole nother ball of wax. It's not the lane that I intended my conversation to be in. Because that's, for me, now you're going over to another topic that that we've had that we don't have time to get into, which is my feelings about how capitalism has unfolded and how it's used in society to wield power and oppress, et cetera. Because when I'll just leave this. When you talk about, and I probably shouldn't leave it because I know it may rile you up, but when you talk about the wealth gap, for example, when you say that European Americans have X amount of dollars to every 6 cents or whatever, the example you gave, when I distill that down to the individual level, it doesn't mean anything. And what I mean by that is, as you know, there's some people of European descent that are living at that 6 cent per dollar rate of some other people. And it's like, to them, if I was to say to that person, that poor person of European descent, well, generally speaking, and according to the data, European Americans have 10 times or 14 times the wealth as African Americans. To that person, it means nothing. It means it means absolutely nothing to that person. So it's like, just economically, we just have a system that's just stupid and is stupid, and it hurts people in general. And then the way it's used politically, it hurts people, and it also puts people in a position of resentment, especially the millions and millions and millions, just in terms of the sheer population numbers of European Americans. And I don't know, you're better with the numbers than me, but there may be as many poor European Americans as there are poor African Americans, just in the sheer number basis. Not
they're about even. They're about even. Yeah, they're about even. I mean, there's 1 in 10 whites that live poor and 1 in 4 blacks that live poor. But total number wise, because they're 300 million, you know what I mean? But we're both around 40 million, about the same.
Right. So if you put those 40 million European Americans next to those 40 million poor African Americans, they're all in the same boat. So when those 40 million European Americans hear politicians, say stuff about the issues that poor African American people are having, they're like, hold on, but what about our issues? And again, I just look at that as something that divides, and it's just so much to unpack there. But it's just so much. Again, it's so much, and I know I opened up a can of worms that you would want to add so much more to, and I got to actually leave enough time in the show to actually say my closing points. But what I want to close out and say is that, and just so you know, and for the listeners, I'm going to do a whole series of shows on the economic things that we're talking about, how classism and racism intersect and all that stuff. And I'm going to bring on a panel of people like Montoya and others to kind of help unpack that, because I have a lot of thoughts about that, and I want people to help me think through it. And I want us to think out loud about these things together and just to have an intelligent conversation around that topic. So, Montoya, I'm going to let you finish up any last things you want to say, and then I have 4 minutes just to say my closing pieces before we get cut off here.
Like I said, I feel like I understand you well. In my personal opinion, maybe you don't. I still feel like there's some areas you're missing. Like you said, I know we don't have 100% time to unpack that or whatever. You know what I mean? So, but I'll just just ultimately say some of what I'm talking about has nothing to do with capitalism whatsoever. I just use that as a political example. And I remember when I first met you, I remember we ended up having a conversation. I didn't know you at the time. You were on a panel, and I remember it was another young man doing the same thing, speaking to some of the real numbers. And you obviously gave your natural pushback. That's how I met you. And at the time, I'm still going. I remember thinking to myself, this man is not speaking reality right now. We're bogging down. This man is wanting to address these real issues we have, and we can't talk about them because, I know you very well now, and I love you to death. But I'm like, this man right here is talking about something that's not even close to true. Because you call your generalization a reality in some areas, it's not close to reality. I'm sorry, but I'll leave it with that.
Okay. So I appreciate you calling in, man. I appreciate all of the callers, Gypsy, D'Amicos, and Montoya, for calling in, adding their context, adding their nuance. I hope that, for the listeners, you guys got a lot out of this. I know it's a lot. I know this is heavy conversation. And, if you got to hit pause sometimes and come back to it and take it in over a few days to unpack it all, please stick with us. Please listen to it all, because I just think that this is what's going to help us move forward as a people. And one of the things that I'm for, and one of the things that I'm moving towards as I continue to learn and grow is, and I know everyone is not going to agree with this statement, but it's something I believe in, is that I want to get away from these segmented groupings that we have, and, this community versus that community. And I think that that's one of the things that's going to be necessary for us to, unravel all the damage that we've inherited, in terms of how we are all, segmented into certain, communities that have certain issues. I just want to, hopefully, speak to a point where we can unpack it and talk about it and work it out. But ultimately, on the other end of the tunnel, we're coming together and we're just creating one nation, indivisible. You guys hear me say it a lot. You're going to hear me say it often. I just want us to get to the point where we're just one nation, indivisible. And if one person has a problem, it's all of our problem. One individual. If one individual has a problem, it's all of our problem. We empathize, we learn, we get to the core root, and we do what we can do to make sure that everyone feels valid. Everyone feels worthwhile, feel like they're contributing to society, and feel like they have equity and equality in society. That's what I feel like we are working towards, and that's what I feel like this work is all about. Not getting stuck, but continuing to move forward. But I'm not afraid to go through all the stuff that we talk about, because I think it's necessary for us to get to the other side, which is not the quote unquote white community, the quote unquote black community, or Hispanic community, quote unquote athlete community, quote unquote rich community, quote unquote poor community, and South community and North community and West community, you name it. I just want to get to the point where we're aware and cognizant of what is healthy for every individual. And it's all of our responsibility to make sure that we're lifting each other up, no matter what. One nation, indivisible. So that's our time for today. Thank you for listening. And a special thank you again to all of our callers. Be sure to subscribe to the Race Haven Podcast on iPhone podcast app or Stitcher Radio app for Android, so that you never miss the dialogue. And if you love this show, please leave us a review, so that we can get more visibility. It helps us to gain more visibility, and more people will take a listen and hopefully join this movement towards moving towards the ideals that I speak towards, if you believe in them. And if you have any questions, you can always inbox me on Facebook or email me or John or even any of the guests, and I can get it to them, like Montoya, some of our regular contributors, at solutions@RaceHavenPodcast.com. Any thoughts, you can share it there. You can also share your thoughts and ideas under the posting of the show on Facebook at our Race Haven Podcast page. Make sure you like and follow that page. And if you want to join the online chat community, you can do so at the Race Haven Community Dialogue Facebook group. If you just search for Race Haven Community Dialogue in the group section, you'll find the group there. Please tell a friend about Race Haven today. Let them know that we're doing some serious work over here to move the culture forward. And when I say the culture, I'm talking about society in general. I don't care about anything about your differentiators or ethnic background or anything like that. The culture is us, the people, the humans. A Race Haven is a safe place for people from diverse ethnic, religious, cultural, and political backgrounds to bring their race-based perspectives, questions, assumptions, frustrations, and experiences to engage in thoughtful, honest dialogue in an effort to transcend race and unify America. Remember, we are all smarter when we think together. Love y'all. Peace.
This is New York firefighter Raphael Porriette for Firehouse Subs. Every day, a part of every sub you buy at Firehouse Subs helps provide life-saving equipment for first responders. And now, for a limited time, they're introducing the Daily Sub Special. Every day, get a medium sub of the day for just $5.55. They kick it off with Meatball Monday and finish it off with Italian Sunday, with something delicious every day in between for just $5.55. Firehouse Subs. Enjoy more subs, save more lives. Tap the banner now to learn more. This is New York firefighter Raphael Porriette for Firehouse Subs. Every day, a part of every sub you buy at Firehouse Subs helps provide life-saving equipment for first responders. And now, for a limited time, they're introducing the Daily Sub Special. Every day, get a medium sub of the day for just $5.55. They kick it off with Meatball Monday and finish it off with Italian Sunday, with something delicious every day in between for just $5.55. Firehouse Subs. Enjoy more subs, save more lives. Tap the banner now to learn more.